I gotta see where my limits of my. All right. I gotta see how far I can go before I get out of the screen view.
I think if you stay with the table.
It looks like I'm okay if I stay at the table or a little beyond. Okay.
And Babyface said that. I didn't know that, so I read his book. It's called Thanks to Gas.
All right, I'm going to come up and join Stephen here. People will probably be wandering in. But to those of you who are online and those of you who are here, thanks. And a great big thanks to Reverend Stephen Wilson, who's given a presentation like this before that I heard 5.5 years ago or something like that. And I'm glad that he's here to talk about all the sort of legal stuff. And I just want to reiterate one of the things that's on that opening slide, that presentation does not constitute legal advice or a legal representation with the presenter. So just make sure that that's clear. So we got it down in writing and speaking.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gary. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I'm going to give you a little background about why I would be the person invited here. So I am an ordained Episcopal priest. I'm officially retired. I'm coming up, this year will be my 28th anniversary being ordained a priest. But in 2004, I took a different path and went to law school, and have been a practicing lawyer now for coming on 16 years. And my particular area of practice is in the probate world, which includes estate planning, probate, although my significant experience is in guardianships and conservatorships in mental health. But the two together form a reason why I come. And I'm gonna, if you have, I've asked you to just write down on a piece of paper 2 questions. One, which is, what's the thing that you're most fearful of? And then the second question is there anything that is sort of a question about legal matters as we get to end of life? So, and I was a rector of a small congregation just until 5 years ago. I mean, I have served in large churches, small churches, in a number of places, but mostly Denver. So I'm a Denver kid. My father was born in Denver, and I've moved back 4 times and have that well. So let's, the first question I have for you, and it's the only time I'm going to ask a question where you have to respond. Otherwise, no one else gets to see these questions. I will look at them a little bit as we go along, and it helps me know what you're most interested in. And maybe you're not sure, and then I'm going to have my presentation. So, there's 2 things to know when we talk about end of life in terms of the church, and whether it's in legal matters, whether it's holy dying, I can't tell you that. I think what comes with holy dying has a variety of things which may or may not involve the legal world or your finances. On the other hand, we play out our lives in practical ways, right? So anybody here who's not going to die? Okay. My experience over too much time is that people either subconsciously don't believe it or they choose to ignore it. It's just what happens. And I'm not sure it's conscious or it's purposeful or it's too hard. And, but one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do today, because we have this conversation, is I'm going to put all of your anxieties and fears about your aging, your children, your lack of children, your finances, your lack of finances in a box, just like in a conceptual way, put it in a box here today, and then we're just going to put that box up on a shelf for this 1 hour. All right? I'm going to give you it back. But for an hour, we have to talk about very practical issues that relate to end of life and what that looks like. Okay? And I spend a lot of time. I spend the majority of my professional hours dealing with families who are struggling because things have fallen apart. You don't go to attorneys because things have gone well, right? And this is the significant challenge. And so I know by the age of our folks that are here, you have 2 experiences, right? Your first set of experiences is that you've gone through your parents or your siblings and their struggles and usually death. And most of us have had some experience with what happens to people's estates because you've lived through it, right? Sometimes with the 20s and 30s folks, they haven't quite been there yet. And they're just looking at me like I'm crazy. And but I know for first part, you've already had some experience of that, and we're still of a generation where we went to funerals. And so you've at least had that part. Although we grew up in a generation where I think the advice was poor, that we need to protect people from going to funerals, and we protect the kids from going to funerals. It's a bunch of hogwash, and it betrays literally thousands of years of human existence that we would isolate the experience of death from the community and from families. And then the second experience you have is, oh my goodness, I'm not 30 years old anymore, and this body of mine isn't working, and I'm now having to face whatever we think our lifespan will be. We're facing that those days are clicking down, right? And then for some of us, like me, I have both parents who are still living with very advanced dementia. And so, as I visited them just yesterday again, I mean, there's this moment of reflection, both about caring for them, but also then, oh my goodness, is this a reflection of what my life will be like as I get to a different point? And these are the real tough questions. And I always laugh with people because when I go to a party, I have a couple of decisions to make. The first decision is, do I tell people I am a preacher, or do I tell them I'm an attorney? And it's kind of a choose your poison, right? Like, what experience do you want to have? I generally will tell people I'm a lawyer because that actually conjures up more positive conversations than when I'm a preacher. But and even if I tell them I'm a lapsed preacher, that still doesn't work very well. And then my problem is they're like, oh, but what kind of an attorney are you? And I say, well, I specialize in death and disability. And I can't tell you, it's like a conversation stop. You might as well say you're an IRS agent. I mean, it's in the category right there where it's bad. And I've never figured out an easier way to explain what I do, except I deal with death and disability. And a lot of it around disability. So this is what we're going to talk about a little bit here. We're going to go through what I find are the less interesting questions first, and then I'm going to want us to wrestle with what I think becomes the real stuff we wrestle with that is not got an easy answer. But it is helpful to think about it in this part of life. So the parts that are not that interesting, I'm going to tell you. Do I need a will or a trust, and what are the pros and cons of that? There are real pros and cons about it. Don't anybody tell you the only way to organize your life is a trust. There are very practical reasons for using a trust. But here's one thing. First of all, if you have an estate that's going to be taxable, do not take your free advice from a presentation like this. Go hire an attorney. If you're worrying about you're going to meet that threshold to pay estate tax, go pay for the attorney. And you already probably have. So that part, you need legal advice to do that. But honestly, even if it sunsets here in a couple of years, back down to $7 million before you hit the estate tax, it's already at like 13 million now. Go pay for the attorney. Like, I have no sympathy. Don't even come to me and say about it. If you've got that amount of money that you need to preserve, go do the attorney. Second is, if you have 3 circumstances, go to the attorney. There's just no point in being here. And that 3 circumstances are this. One is you have a second family. If you have a second family, go to the attorney. There's nothing around that I can say in this that's going to help your situation and give you guidance in that. You've got to go talk to an attorney, because second families, in a practical matter, really involve needing an attorney. The second piece that very much needs an attorney is if you have a special needs child. When I say special needs child, I mean maybe has a developmental disability, maybe has a mental illness, or some other incapacity whereby they're receiving money from you or assistance from you from your estate may be problematic. You really need to go talk to an attorney, because these are challenging pieces. And that could be a substance abuse issue. Now, here's where I'm going to get real with you. I do not assume you have children, and I don't assume that the children you have are like the ones that people post on social media or everybody goes and brags about when you're meeting with how great their freaking kids are, right? I'm dealing with life, and my part of the practice, I don't make money because your kids are great. I make money because things have not worked out the way we'd all dreamed for, right? It's where I live. It's not that these aren't wonderful human beings. It's not that they're lesser. But you know what? I spend a lot of time with going like, oh my gosh. You know, they didn't tell me this. I mean, I know I'm 50, going to be 58. I'm not that old, but I'm not that young. No one told me when I became a parent that once the kids got out of the house, I'm still going to worry about them. Like, oh, geez, I thought I was done. I mean, you know, come on now. So this is why I'm telling you we put this stuff on the box, right? Because we're talking the real. Because one of the things about the legal world is there's nothing about the legal world, and people who'd say this, I have 1,000 responses about why. It is not about like some overarching moral system that we're all, if we just became lawyers, we'd be better off, right? Legal systems are meant to be dispute resolution systems. Now, if they happen to be just and fair, they don't equate, okay? So, and I don't want to talk about a just or fair legal system because that's great for law school and it's great for philosophers and it's great for us to have these great conversations about the theory of law. But in practice, what we need to talk about today is it's a dispute resolution process. And sometimes things get resolved in a way you may not think are fair, okay? But we're going to talk about dispute resolution process, and why do we have a dispute resolution process? Because something hasn't worked. All right? That's why we're talking here. And I'm not saying you need that circumstance. I'm not trying to be negative, but I need us to get real. It's the same question as like, are you going to die? Oh, yeah, okay. Are there things in my life that are fearful and they haven't worked out the way I intended? Okay, I'm not going to make you raise your hand. That's why we have the cards, right? I don't want to out anybody about particular things. So the second, a little less interesting, it's probably not going to be what your priest really thought they were inviting me about, but he has heard me talk, so he knows this part. Your dying in some sense isn't that interesting. It's a fact. It's going to happen. And upon your death, a couple of things besides having a church service will occur. And one of them is, if we haven't outlived our friends and our own family, I recognize that one of the difficulties as we age even longer, sometimes we outlive our children, and it's a fact. People are going to gather together or not gather together depending upon it. One of the gifts about belonging to a Christian community is you actually have been engaged with people over a longer period of time who actually kind of care that you have died. I'm just going to be straightforward about it. I mean, you can live out in the community without any real connection to anybody, and whether or not anybody you've noticed is an issue. But then the question comes, what happens to your stuff? Let's just get frank. When I was a clergy person, like I said, I've been in a practicing priest from, I was a youth minister when I started in 1990, and I had a congregation where I was the priest until 2018. And I grew up in a clergy family. I mean, I've been around a lot of church. Here's the stuff I never realized when I was the priest. It's not that your clergy are not perfectly fine, right? But they're coming to you when you're in the hospital. They're praying for you about, oh my gosh, have a peaceful death. In one sense, I would just give you the Compline prayer for good night, which is keep watch, O Lord, over those who watch or weep this night, right? Honestly, that would be the prayer I'd give to everybody, and I do give to every friend that's with their parent or themselves dying. And, let the priest just come and be present and tell them to shut up. I think clergy should say less and be more silent. That's the prayer that you need. Here's the part I never understood until I was an attorney. People tell me a lot more about their lives as an attorney than they ever do as a priest. Because they come and it's a pain point, right? You want your priest to like you. You're a little afraid. My experience is people are a little afraid that if they tell the priest actually what's going on, they might think less of them. I don't think that's really true, but I think that's the fear most people have. You come to your attorney and you're telling me all kinds of stuff because we're in the pain point. Here's where the pain point comes, right? So I think I never understood is how much effort it takes to figure out the practical issues of your death after you're gone. Like somebody has to come and deal with the stuff wherever you're living, right? Now, for some of us, we're living in a house. Somebody has to come deal with your lifetime of stuff in the house. Now, for those of us who have moved to a smaller place or into some kind of residential facility outside of your house, you've had to do at least one downsizing when you've gotten there, and there may be less stuff. But practically, somebody has to come deal with the stuff. And if you've had a parent or someone who's died and you've been in charge of it, you have a sense of it, right? Can't tell you how many people show up at my office when I do estate planning because, oh my God, my parent died and that was painful. Okay? It's just truth. My parents, because they both have advanced dementia, we did it while they were living. We had to go in they had purged nothing. We had to go in and deal with the whole house, get it sold, distribute everything while they're living because they were going to move into memory care facilities. It is a long, tedious process. Well, tedious. It can be a long and painful process. The second part is then people have to decide what to do with your assets. Now, this is what wills and trusts do. It is a structured way of which you've made decisions about who's going to be in charge of that process of dealing with your assets. And by this, we're not talking spiritual legacies here. I would argue these are spiritual matters, but they're not spiritual legacies or your reputational legacies. These are your stuff. What's in the bank account? What's in the stock account? Is it a house? Is there furniture? Is there art? Is there secret collections that you don't want anybody to know about, but you didn't take care of? Like, I'm getting real, because I walk into cases where like, oh, what's in this house? That's an interesting collection. I didn't know that person was interested in that. These are real issues, because you come in. And one of the things that I'm not going to be able to talk about, although it's an interesting thing to talk about yourself, is if you have a digital life, what happens to that digital life? So most of us have photos now, and does any of us really go and get printed out photos? No, we have all these things that are in our digital life, and what happens when we pass, what happens to that digital life? I don't have enough time. I could do this talk for 8 hours today. But you have to think about, so who's going to do it, right? Who's going to physically come and take care of going to the bank accounts? Many bank accounts, many financial accounts have what we call, and you've all heard this, but in a refresher, it's paid on death accounts or transfer on death accounts. You've gone and you've signed, this is one thing that all attorneys will ask you to do, go back to those accounts and see, well, who's on there? Now, 90% of the time, who you thought was on there probably is. 10% of the time, you're like, ooh, I forgot to change that one. So now I've left it to somebody who's already died. I've left it to my ex-spouse who I didn't want to do it. There's things that happen to go check. But somebody upon your death has to go to those financial institutions, present a death certificate, and have that money be given to the people you've specified, right? For accounts that don't have that, whether it's a trust or will, and this is the thing that I want to demystify, trusts just operate in a little different way, but they still have a section that says, my stuff will go to these people, okay? Or these institutions. Same with the will. You always have to have a will, even if you have a trust, because if anything got left out of the trust. In trusts, I'm going to give you a little background. When you have a trust, I can't tell you how many times somebody's died, they have a trust, they went and paid me about 4 times, I'm going to charge you for a will, and there's nothing in it. You say, well, what does that mean? There's nothing. A trust isn't something that just sits out there that controls over everything. It's just a legal agreement, and the only thing a trust is able to manage are assets that you've put into the name of the trust. We call it funding a trust, right? So if you have a trust that has no assets in it, it's just nothing. I mean, there's nothing there. You have to have things transferred into a trust for them to be accurate. A will deals with anything that you've owned that doesn't have a paid on death account, and it's not funded into a trust. But there's still the same mechanism. A trustee has a trustee who has to go administer it. Will has what we call an executor, a personal representative has to administer it. Somebody still has to do it, right? So this is why I don't find it that interesting. In truth, someone just has to come in and manage your life after your death, the financial aspects of it, and administer it. And both trusts and trustees have to deal with your creditors, okay? Not the primary creditor, but the super creditor who has the priority over getting your things are the tax man, right? The IRS has super priority. So if you've unpaid taxes or something that's there, that's the first part. And one of the things that has to be done upon your death is your final tax return has to go to see, is there any outstanding tax debt? Now, usually, for most people, you've been filing your tax returns every year, you've been keeping up to date with that. Upon your death, there is no tax, right? And unless you have those high limits, because Colorado has no estate tax, there's a number of states that have an estate tax that you have to deal with, but Colorado is not one of them, and that amount is high right now. $13 million is a lot of net assets that, and that, if you give to charity, that number is just the amount you're giving to individuals or funding some kinds of trust arrangements for. But somebody's got to do it. But the taxes person is the next. The next are creditors, right? There's a lot of people that die insolvent. That gets to be a challenge about who's willing to administer your estate if you're insolvent. And I'm not trying to, I don't know your financial situation, I don't care to, but I know people have a real spectrum, right? And it's possible that you leave this world with about zero. But here's the thing I want to tell you about it. Figure out where do you want all your assets to go and who do you want to be responsible for them. And then you got about every 5 years, you have to figure it out again. Because things change, right? The one thing that comes about thinking about our death in this very practical matter is, I wanted my younger sister, Sue, to be my administrator because she's younger, usually. And I trust her, and so I want her to be in that role, and I got these 3 people I want to give money to, and I want to save something for another institution, a charity, the church, something. Well, in 5 years, you go back and say, well, unfortunately, my sister Sue died, and I'm unhappy with this organization, and things happen, right? It is a process of continually updating those documents. And then it's just figuring out, how do I want them to go, right? I saw questions here about how do I make sure you follow my estate plan? The system is meant to be that beneficiaries generally have to be the enforcers of these. And And one of the benefits about going through probate as opposed to a trust is there is some judicial oversight of probate that then is more easy to challenge if your estate is being administered properly than through a trust. Honestly, lots of people who have trusts have a large amount of assets, and so the beneficiaries are more motivated and can attack a trust, there's no doubt, and argue about mismanagement in trusts, although it takes more financial resources to challenge a trust in court than your will and the probate administration that's there. I just want to touch on that. I can't go into all the pieces about that, but there is a regularized system. So one of the things you have to think about is bankruptcy proceedings and probate administration and trust administration are similar. Like, what are all of our assets? Is the taxes been paid? Who is it supposed to go to? We do an accounting, you get it sorted out to the various parties. And what I would say is this: if you don't have a will or a trust, remember I'm saying that they do the same things, and you die without one or an invalid one, I have a statute book here in the state of Colorado that tells me exactly how that your estate is going to be divided. I mean, it exactly tells me. People will come to me all the time and say, oh my gosh, Mr. Wilson, I don't know what we're going to do. We don't have a will. What's going to happen to everything? And they're like, this is so complicated. I'm like, oh gosh, this isn't complicated at all. I turn to page 325 and it tells me exactly how things are going to be distributed. So think about this. The state of Colorado, and it's not that it's bad. Remember, this is dispute resolution. The state of Colorado has created a will for you that is your default will. If you want something else, then you've got to go and get it done. But the state of Colorado has one because it's, remember, dispute resolution. We need an organized pattern. Now, I have had a young person came into me. Her mother, she thought, was evil and may, in fact, have been evil, but her meanness to her daughter over a lifetime, when she came in to do her own will in those parts, and we were talking about, some attorneys can turn it around in 3 weeks. Sometimes it takes us 8 to 12 weeks just to get to final documents. She was so upset about, and I said, well, I think we need to sit down right now and write out a handwritten will. She's like, what do you mean? I said, you have such antipathy to your mother. And I, honestly, justifiable. But if you die today, everything's going to go to her. I mean, the book tells me. Today, here's your plan. Okay? And, but I tell you that because this is, in my world, the least interesting part of what we're talking about. Okay? How your stuff goes at your end of life, you can go do a will, you can do a trust. If you have extra resources, you may need a more expensive attorney. I mean, otherwise, basic estate planning is not terribly expensive, and it's worthwhile doing. I'm sorry I won't ask all those questions, but here's the part where, in our time that we have, I think is the most challenging piece, or not. It's not your death, it's giving. The more challenging piece is your disability as you get to the end of life. Now there we get the real, that's the hard part. And I've read on some of the questions about, am I gonna die alone? Let's see, aging, pain. Some people are saying there's nothing they're fearing about when they get older. Okay, I love you, and you're kind of lying. It's all right. Not leaving things well organized for our kids. Last thing I'll say about the other part, do leave things well organized. Think about if you have a stroke tomorrow and somebody has to step in your life, have a 3-ring binder that tells you who's the insurance agent, where are the assets, where's a copy of the tax returns. Tax returns tell all kinds of great things because they tell you if you're getting income from other sources. Be organized so that whoever has to step in on that day when they get a call that you've been at a stroke and in the hospital, they can walk in and have one place where they get started. Like any piece of advice you today for your family, you want to do something good for them, be organized, and even if it's embarrassing things because you're like, here's the credit card statements that all have $10,000 of credit card debt on each of them, have it in one place. I mean, that's the gift you can give them. I had a member of my congregation who died, and he had a table about 4 times the size, and when he died, literally it was about 2 feet tall of papers. That included bills, checks, statements, and we had to pay the public administrator to come in and take that big mound of paper. And let me tell you too, it's a pain. Be organized. But what I want you to think about in terms of holy dying actually is the reality that for most of us, there is going to be some physical and cognitive decline as we get to our later years. Okay? And then the question is, what's the plan as we're going to move towards that part of our life? And I want to, we can't solve all that, but I'm going to talk about 3 areas that I think are progressing areas of interest to me, and hence I'm sharing them with you. So the first is, your medical and financial powers of attorney may be some of your most important documents that you have. A financial power of attorney, I mean, there's a lot that goes around that because they can be abused, but think about this, and I'm going to use the word stroke, not because, but it's just one of the easier ways to talk about it. So if you've had a stroke, and whether it's even minor, and there are some that are minor, or, medical interventions, those can be pretty minor and require maybe just a brief hospitalization and rehab. Others can be more severe. But the point being is, with the financial power of attorney, just think about, you are in the hospital, not being able to manage your finances. Who can step in to manage your finances? If we had a longer period of time, I was doing this for 3 hours, I'd make you sit down right now and tell me who's going to do it today. We walk out of here, you have a stroke, literally today, who's going to do that, right? Now, some of you have it. Married couples, it tends to be a little easier because their spouse will do it. That's not always the case, but for those of us who are single, who's going to do that literally today as you walk out the door? Okay? And so that financial power of attorney needs to be able to step in and pay bills, needs to figure out, is your insurance up to date? I mean, what are the things that need to happen? The second is, who's going to make a medical decision for you? Now, some of us, it's a little challenge. Like, who do I want to make a medical decision? My children are 23 and 21. I kind of know what this looks like. I don't want to burden them that way. Now, I have the good fortune that for my former spouse, we're still in good terms, and I know my kids are going to go talk to her anyway about if something happens to me. And so I've kept her. I had to do special documents after the divorce. I kept her as a decision maker because honestly, she's going to get burdened with it whether she likes it or not. And fortunately, we're on good terms, so that helps, right? Not all of us have that situation, granted. But you got to figure out who's going to make this decision. And then in that process, have you communicated to that person what your values and your thoughts about end of life are? Now, I don't want you, when you think about that, I want you to, and you may not have thought about it. What are my values and ideas about what end of life should look like and what my medical care is? But I'm not going to suggest that you go into details. I had a client one time, God bless them, and they were Episcopalians, 5 pages of instructions for what they want to happen towards the end of life. 5 pages. And we wrote it in. I'm like, the chance something's going to change in 5 pages of instructions is like a guarantee. Like, I'm not sure we got a week without there might being a change in 5 pages. And honestly, the dilemma is this. Listing out all the possible variations isn't helpful, because what happens in your decline is going to be unique to you. I don't know all the factors. They're just going to be unique to you. But it is very important to communicate to the people who would have to make decisions an essential set of values and principles for you. Now, some of us may say, hey, if I get to the point where I'm going to make something up and be provocative. When I get to 80, if anything happens to me, no treatment. Now, I've never reached an 80-year-old that's healthy that goes, oh yeah, that's the plan. Like no antibiotics. I don't care if I got the UTI. I don't care if I'm going to get the cyst off my arm. No interventions when I'm 80. Well, okay, but you got to give something to, you're getting my point though. You got to give something to people to work with. Like if you're in that situation and by nature of a medical power of attorney, the reason why someone else is making the decision is because the medical providers don't believe you can give them informed consent. And if you can't give informed consent, somebody's going to need to do it on your behalf. Now, I spend most of my working hours for people who did not have a power of attorney or their power of attorney has failed. And so we have to be in court to appoint a guardian and conservator. And sometimes we have to appoint professionals because, and I spend a lot of time, this doesn't matter because this is the most cases in the world, but I spend all my time dealing with fighting children. I make all my money, I spend all my time with fighting children. I've had a case recently where we had 4 daughters who were fighting over mom, and I was appointed by the court eventually to make recommendations to fix how we're going to solve this. Problem solving. It's just problem solving. Here's what I find happens and why I asked you to put this on the box. People go, I don't know the answer and it's hard and I don't like what I have to decide and I don't want either kid to do it or I've got 3 kids and I want them all to do it. It makes you anxious and you delay. And then eventually I get paid. So. I don't mean to be crass and I don't do it because of that reason, but I'm just telling you the truth, right? This is what it looks like when we get to these moments. And so you have to figure that out. Who's going to make those decisions? But honestly, I think it's kind of not the most interesting one. But I'm going to say, I want to get to where I think is the more interesting place for you to really think about. And it's going to start with a provocative statement. Do not, I repeat to you, do not, as admonition as an attorney or as a clergy person, do not lay onto your children and family the following. Never put me in a nursing home. I can't tell you how many times I have this. Mom promised me never to put her in a nursing home. Now, I've spent a lot of time in nursing homes. As a clergy person, you go to a lot of nursing homes. As my role and what I do, I go to a lot of nursing homes. I know more about the spectrum of quality of nursing homes and of assisted livings and of independent livings than as most people. And I understand why people will go, ooh, I don't want to be in that situation that I saw Uncle Harry. Do not give this direction to your children unless you need the tax planning attorney and you can afford 24/7 care in your house, which runs about $25,000 a month, just as an FYI. So for those folks that got it, God bless you. Fine. Spend it. I understand being in your house is going to feel more comfortable. For the rest of us, do not lay that on your family because I will tell your family members it was an improper ask of you. It was unfair, it was selfish, it was improper, and if you're living under that illusion because your parent told you that, let it go. You're just going to have to come to terms with that was an improper ask. Why do I say that? And this is where the provocative question to get to the interesting question. As we get older and we think about the reality that we're likely to be disabled, the issue for all of us is not whether or not we can be independent, whatever that means to us. It's at what level of dependence gives us our self-determination. I'm going to repeat that because it's a little subtle, right? We go about our lives thinking, I'm taking care of myself. I've had a job, I've gotten retirement, I've saved, I've taken care of things, and I want my independence. And, on the other side, we also know that while I'm slowing down, you have 2 parents with very advanced dementia. Every time I forget something, you're going, is it me? Is this just normal, or is this the first signs that I'm sliding there? Trust me, these things become real. But the question is not whether or not you're going to be dependent on other people, and let's face it, most of us are dependent. We're going to have Social Security. You have some dependents. I don't know people that go, hey, I'll just give up my Social Security. Don't let it go. Or, so one of the things that is interesting to me is, as you think about your aging, what level of assistance will help you keep your most self-determined life? Because it's not either or. You know, for example, people think about nursing homes, but the truth is there's lots of, we call them independent living. You're not independent, you're just needing a certain level of assistance to help you keep your self-determination. We're all gonna need help, right? You're gonna need Medicare. That is just simply another tool that helps you keep your self-determination. So you're not worrying about, in the same way you would without it, about having medical insurance as you get older. And if you have disabled children, and it's, you know, I find it controversial even to use that term, but it's just, they have more dependence on us in order to reach their self-determination. And so the question is, as each step along the way, you experience losing your ability to be as independent as you were at an earlier age, think about what are the supports that will help me keep my self-determination at each stage along our way, and think about that beforehand. So, you know, a practical example is, you know, you stay in your house. Now, this is controversial because I know a lot of people, most people I know, they've been living in their house a long time, they're comfortable, they want to stay in their house. But but one of the things that is interesting to think about is, okay, what can I do to my house now that will make it easier for me to live there? Super practical. But I encourage everyone to think about that. And if you have even, you know, your brothers and sisters, if you happen to have parents that are still living, it's a thought process about what can I do to help make the next step of my life so that I can keep that self-determination. I can continue to have as much autonomy as possible, but what are those little interventions along the way? And then, you know, as you say, and what will the next step look like? I'll just tell you, my parents, he's a retired clergy person, they were living in Louisville, Kentucky. They have an interesting Episcopal nursing home there that had patio homes that were connected to there, and as you aged and declined, you could go through this series of steps through the process. My parents start experiencing dementia. The plan all had been along, we're going to go into the patio home, we're going to sell the house, we're going to make that life. We discover what happened to the patio home. Oh, we got on the top of the list a year ago and we ignored it. Okay. I'm just telling you, my parents live in a memory care facility and we've had to sell everything. And a lot of effort on the behalf of my sister and I, and continuing effort. The plan, you can make plans, but you got to execute the plan. Okay. But I want to focus right here though, because it's this question about what are the things that I can do? You are going to not be as autonomous in the future as you are now. I personally, my dream at 75, I'm a big hiker. I want to be hiking up in the mountains. I want to have a heart attack and die right there instantly on the. Can we take bets on what the probability of that happening? Anybody? Like less than 1% chance that that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's great. That is not a plan. Like, if your plan is the 1% thing has to happen, it's not a plan. And I'm not being a jerk. Well, I'm being a jerk. It's not a plan. But be practical. I mean, I don't know if you like podcasts. I like podcasts. I'm not a big reader. I listen to podcasts. Kristen Tippett her podcast is On Being. There's a recent podcast with a woman who is an engineer, but has really thought about how our physical spaces allow us to keep autonomy. And I recommend that little podcast because it really has helped crystallize some thinking I had and why I'm spending so much time on this part. Our physical space around us allows us to have autonomy, right? I mean, we all take for granted that we have houses that keep the elements out from us, right? And that we can heat them. But there's all kinds of things. I mean, it's the reason why it matters if we're handicap accessible. And when we say handicap accessible, for anybody who doesn't want to fall and trip, like my mom's fallen 3 times in the last 3 weeks, I mean, this happens, right? But if you have steps that make you get into the church, your ability to navigate coming into church is just harder, right? Not that you're not able to come to church or would like to come to church, you just can't get there because physically getting into the building is a problem. But this multiplies itself over so many ways in your life, right? And then the question is, how are you going to organize your life for the next steps? Because this is going to be the more interesting, and I say more interesting, it's because it's the one that you have the most ability to impact. You and I cannot change the course of some of our illness narratives. I mean, I spend a lot of time trying to be as healthy as I can, and I can't tell you how much energy I spend thinking about how can I forestall dementia when I stare at it all the time. And it's severe. This isn't forgetful parents. My parents are severe. And so I think about that, but I can't control that ultimately. Let's just be honest, I can't control it. What I can control is what are the things I can do in place to make steps where I think about what are we going to do next? And what point in time, and do I then say, okay, now is the point in time I need to think about what is the next step going to be? As you might imagine, I have condensed what I would normally do in about 3 hours into an hour. I could do 8 hours on the topic. I mean, I have a lot of so you disagree with me, don't worry about disagreeing with you. And here in about 2 minutes, I'm going to give you your box back and you can go be anxious. But I thank you for staying here with me and talking, or honestly listening. But I'm trying to provoke some thoughts for you. I guess one of the last things I would say is something to think about your holy living and holy dying as you get through those other years. Think about the ways in which you can continue to maintain and keep connections with other humans. And I call myself a lapsed preacher, and you can imagine growing up as a priest kid and then becoming a priest, and then my kids have to have a priest for a parent. I've thought a lot about church. I don't have a lot of glamour around church or think that Christians are special. And I don't even think Episcopalians are special, to be honest. Shocker. But I've grown up as Episcopalian, so it's my life. But here's one thing I think is an amazing piece. I'm going to last 3. I'm sorry. I would not be good. I'd be terrible if I were here every week. Here's the one thing I do think is amazing about our Christian communities. It is one of the few places in our life where week after week, it's called propinquity, we come and see the same people week after week. Oh, I know, I've been in churches. You can fight with church people as much as you can anybody else. That aside, though, in truth, though, this is one of the places where we meet human beings week after week. I mean, there's very few places in our lives where we do that. And it's a gift. But sometimes it's a gift that we come and I think in general, Episcopalians are pretty introverted. They're not like the social crazy people. They're not extroverts that love to have a big party. I think clergy should be party givers, to be honest, but that's not what I say. But here's the other thing that's amazing about church communities is that it is also one of the few places that people of different economic backgrounds can come together and be on the same page. This is really important, where you can have people who have a lot of resources and people who are struggling. They're not going to tell you they're struggling. But I know that. I've known this, because I know the financial situation of most of my members always. And they can come together and be in the same place. Our society has very few places where you can go do that. Almost none. We segment about, who sits in the front row of the DCPA or who sits in the balcony. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which, I'm living on my Social Security, I'm barely making it. Other people are making big trips. It is one of the few places that we come into contact with each other in a way which is not about our resources and also not about our age. And so it's one of the few places that we can come, and then we're about something else. I think our something else is about love and about how we care for each other and how we connect to each other. At times we don't always share that because we're a little afraid to be self-disclosing in a community. And I think some of it is just like your clergy, right? Your clergy are going to love you even if you disclose things to them, all right? The people around you are going to love you if you disclose it, but we're fearful. And the reason we're fearful, and I don't think fearful is a bad thing, we're fearful because these things matter to us. You don't want to be rejected by your clergy, because then they matter. Your people matter to you. You don't want to be rejected by your church people, because these are the people you see all week. I won't make you raise your hand, but I have decent understanding of some people, the people they see, maybe the only people they see all week is us, right? And it's one of the few, Rochelle, I've always been a priest that cries. I'm sorry, I'm not standing there. That cries at funerals, cries at baptisms, I don't care. I've long ago, don't care about this part. But it is one of the true places where it's one of the few places in the community where we come in, where does kindness and caring and trying to see each other happen? The rest of it, it sounds great in the theologians, well, the glory of God, and I know you're in stewardship season, you have all this other stuff about, oh gosh, make a good shepherd, whatever, right? We have to do it, it's part of the game, but it's not the reason why the gift of what we do is. The gift of what we do is these are people, and we challenge each other, because you're like, that person's not particularly kind or generous, or cares anything about themselves. Okay, but we love them anyway. It's one of the few places where we love people because they're human. Not because of what they did, not because of the job they held, not how much money they have, not whether they've made mistakes, not whether their family looks great, it's just, and so I commend that to you. I'm sorry that you get a download, never put a preacher in front of you and expect him to shut up. So thank you. You have your box back. Your anxieties can go with you. Be done. It's great to be with you all. I did attend the earlier service, so I'm not going to attend the second one with you all, but thanks for inviting me and being here.
Thank you.